say anything.
My what?
All right, guys, we're back. I just right before starting, I for anybody who tuned in last week, you know that I said Chris was out last week. He had some work obligations, and I also said that we all know that Chris is in the political space. Maybe we could convince him to give us the behind the scenes scuttlebutt about what's going on in the political space. Although I don't know that that's what it was. And I just dropped that on Chris just now. So welcome back, Chris. It's good to be here with you. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and if there is anything of import that might be fun to share about what you've been looking at in the political space, what you've been dealing with, please feel free to share.
Sure. I am Chris Matola. I am a political consultant and have been for the past, God help me, 40 years of my life. And I've done over 400 campaigns, 7 presidentials, 8 U.S. senators, 11 governors, et cetera, et cetera. So happy to be here with Justin and talking some politics and little political betting. So it's an interesting week because a lot's kind of happening. You're kind of seeing the death knells of Nikki Haley, and it never really kind of got off the launching pad. And there was also a great article, which I urge everybody to read, in a publication called The Bulwark. It's a subscription thing, but the first 5 articles are free, and it's from a guy named Mark Caputo. And Mark's a friend, and but he wrote about the DeSantis campaign implosion, and it's probably one of the 2 or 3 best inside politics articles I've ever read in my life. I mean, it was like it hit like late at night, at like 11 o'clock at night, and it went around the consulting community like a venereal disease. I mean, it was pretty amazing. I think I just lost you there, Justin. But yeah. But it was all about, it kind of named names and talked about, bad behavior, bad strategy, bad tactics, bad management. And it was kind of almost like a perfect storm of every horror story that, you get to experience in a campaign rolled into one. So I really recommend that. That has some repercussions going down the future for political organizations and how they tried to run. Basically, what happened is that the DeSantis campaign. So let me kind of explain. So if you're running for president or you're running for office, you are limited to how you can raise money, and you can raise it only from individuals and only in small bunches. If you go beyond that and get caught, you wind up in jail. And if not the politician, but certainly the fundraisers, and that's happened. So what's happened is that because of a lot of court cases, frankly, starting back in 1980 with a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, and then, kind of codified in Citizens United, is that independent expenditures and super PACs can raise money, and there's really no limit. So if you are Peter Thiel or George Soros, you can write $1 million check, and they do. And those are the spots, if you're watching TV, will usually be about, candidate Jones is a son of a bitch, and it has, paid for by citizens for senators, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. And that means it's an independent spot. And for the most part, they really are independent. There tries to be if you've been in politics for 14 seconds, you don't need to coordinate with a campaign, because if you've done a bunch of campaigns, you know what campaigns look like. But anyway, what the DeSantis people decided to do is that the super PAC, which can raise all the money and raise a lot of money easily, especially if you're a front runner or a viable candidate, decided to take over the traditional duties of the DeSantis campaign. including things like travel. What that meant was if you were on the DeSantis bus going to one of Iowa's 99 counties, the bus was paid for and authorized by the super PAC, but DeSantis and his campaign staff got to ride in it, which meant the people riding in the bus and sitting in the bus couldn't talk to the candidate because it would be an illegal coordination, which is fucking insane. And the entire thing was run like that. And what they were trying to do was break through the wall and create new ground in terms of how you can fund campaigns. But in the article, one thing missing in the article was any legal counsel, and people that said, "What do you got people nuts?" But anyway, but that was kind of interesting. The other thing that was kind of a throwaway line in that is that in Iowa alone, Ron DeSantis had $53 million worth of negatives spent against him. More than it was against Trump, more than it was against Haley. But $53 million is not an insignificant amount. In 2016, I worked for Marco Rubio. I worked for the super PAC for Marco Rubio. And Rubio, across 5 states, had around $80 million in negatives spent against him. And it's really an insurmountable amount because you're just constantly hammered and you can never get any momentum going. Rubio finished 3rd in Iowa, I think, 5th in New Hampshire and 2nd in South Carolina. But he really needed to be finished 3, 2, and 1 in order to take off. And, he was close to doing that. And it was a viable strategy. But as an unknown candidate, it is very difficult to get above that, to get above, $50 million, $70 million worth of negative.
Where was that money coming from? Was that Democrats targeting DeSantis?
No, a lot of it was Haley money. A lot of it was Trump money. A lot of it was kind of Trump indulgent PACs. It was less it was less one group than a bunch of groups. And the DeSantis people didn't have a way to counter that. I mean, I was not involved in this race, but I was shocked to see that they never even talked about it, because that would have been one of my
interesting
ongoing talking points. But I really, the Bulwark, Mark Caputo, it's one of the greatest political articles I've read. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have it pulled up here to read later.
Yeah, it's long. It's long and it's detailed and it's political porn.
Well, nothing says a good time like political porn. Come on. It's really interesting that you started to get into, you mentioned there about some of the background on campaign finance. And I think a lot of people, at least anybody who would bother to listen to us right now, is probably at least somebody who knows about Citizens United and maybe even knows a little bit of the background in that was a real Mitch McConnell victory. I think in years in the planning, probably, for the Supreme Court to really usher in what now kind of people on all sides don't like how much money is in it, they say, but it really kind of opened the floodgates. I don't know if you saw recently, and I'm trying to look at it. I'm trying to look it up because I didn't put it on our show notes to run today, but you teed it up so perfectly. I read an article yesterday about a potential lawsuit or legal action on the part of Meta, Facebook, and they say that it could be the unraveling. It could basically open the door for the Supreme Court to completely undo all campaign finance. Now it's the next step in opening almost an unregulated, other than potentially foreign money would stay blocked. But have you seen this at all? I'll have to go back and look at it and put it in our show notes,
Yeah.
and I'll share it with you. I'll also put a link to the Bulwark article in our notes. But have you seen that article? Have you seen what's happening with Meta and what they're trying to do?
Yeah, and I guess the dirty secret is that it could all end in 2 seconds if Congress passes a law and the president supports a law to get rid of it. That's it. And kind of making the Supreme Court kind of the bad guy in this is a little disingenuous because, and you can agree with their ruling or not, but they shouldn't even be in the position of having to make the ruling, right? Because the dirty secret is, whoopsie, is that both Republicans and Democrats and labor unions and teachers unions and businesses, they want this. They want to influence elections. I mean, the simple answer would be, and especially in this day and age, it'd be very easy to allow unlimited donations to campaigns, to hard money campaigns, to the actual candidate, but make the reporting requirement for anything over, $1,000, make it a 12-hour, 24-hour window, and it's get close to the election. It should be instantaneous kind of thing. And again, electronic filing, you can do that 2 seconds. You input it, you hit it, goes to the FEC, and that way, because voters. There's a wonderful William Wyler line about moviegoers, and he said, individually they're idiots, together they're a genius. And
Wisdom,
you can
wisdom of
kind
the
of
crowd.
right. It's wisdom of the crowd. And that was the Wyler thing, that like an individual can get something wrong or not know what's going on, but collectively they kind of go in the right direction. And voters don't need an expert. Voters don't need to find out when the Living Koch brother is making an investment or a donation. You kind of say, if you're kind of a politician with not a great reputation, and some billionaire gives you $5 million, you kind of go, oh, well, fuck you. I know what's going on here, right? And that becomes a legitimate issue within the campaign. And I think litigating that out within the campaign is fine. It's healthy.
Yeah, I read an article. I want to say it was even pre 2016 that I guess they did some data analysis, and that they found that money doesn't actually sway elections as much as it's perceived to sway elections. That there are many other things that matter way more. I mean, and I guess there may be some caveat into how you look at that data, right? So incumbency is the biggest indicator of a victory. Right. Incumbents generally win consistently. They're pick, and in redistricting, they're picking their own voters. So they're very safe, and they're making their seats safer all the time. So it's interesting because according to them, and I think we even see that, I would assume Hillary outspent Trump. I would assume that there are some really well-known examples of like the money doesn't really buy the election. So then it comes down to like, what is the value of it, right? And I'm curious what you think. In my mind, part of what I think the value is, and the reason that the politicians aren't voting the way you said they should be, the way they could end this, is because of their own leadership PACs and the influence that buys them among other members. It's really more of an internal, as I'm thinking about it, I could be wrong, but I would think that it's more of an internal game within the machinations of the politics itself, rather than trying to sway public opinion. It's about doling out support in a primary. Because again, if you win your primary and you're an incumbent, you're likely to maintain your seat. The primary would be where I would think people would be most vulnerable if they are a vulnerable candidate. Yeah. So what do you think about that? I mean, absolutely. Am I thinking about that the right way? Is that how we would think about it?
Yeah. I think that's an important part of the puzzle, and kind of addressing that as part of the solution. During the Cold War, there was a theory that used to be called mutually assured destruction, that if both sides had a lot of nuclear weapons, they would never use them. And, and soft money, corporate money, unregulated money, is kind of like that. Now, here's a great dirty secret. Since 2014, or since 2004, the Democrat candidate for president has outspent the Republican. In like Hillary and Biden outspent Trump by 750 to $1 billion. If you count in hard money, soft money, unions, teachers, blah, 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 blah. And that is a staggering amount of money, because in the presidential arena, by the way, Democrats regularly outspend Republicans at all levels. And that's just a political fact, because Democrats figured out how to do digital fundraising, which is kind of dying now, by the way, because of some regulations. It's been kind of getting regulated out, and and people are tired of getting those texts in and those kind of panic all cap things. Democracy is dead unless you send me $5. But and you can do that trick a little bit, but at a certain point, you kind of go, especially when some people see how the money's being spent, and they kind of go like, "Fuck you." But that kind of money matters more on a presidential level, because an example, in 2008, I was working for John McCain against Obama. McCain was the sponsor of McCain-Feingold, which was the presidential campaign finance thing, where you were limited in how much money you could take, and also how it could be spent. And we were like, "My God, please don't take it." But he was just like, "It's my bill, I have to take it," which because John McCain had integrity. So we would get to a place like Florida, which should be a Republican state, and it certainly was in 2008. And I'm going to do this roughly. McCain, we spent, I want to say, like $28 million in Florida. Obama spent like 80. And to spend $80 million in, because again, they smartly knew if John McCain couldn't win Florida, he couldn't win the presidency. And the idea was, if we can block him out of a couple big states like North Carolina, like Florida, there's no electoral scenario where he can win. But that kind of makes a big difference, because the Obama people were smart and David Axelrod was smart and they knew what the fuck they were doing. But then you go to the Hillary people, who just pissed money away on nonsense, and weren't running ads in Michigan and Pennsylvania and fucking Wisconsin.
Yeah. I guess my follow up to that would be like, can you give an example between those, a comparative example between the Clinton campaign in 2016 and Obama in 08? Like, I agree in hearing you talk about it. Yeah, that seems really, if you have the ability to have a spending advantage, which Obama did, to be able to throw a lot of money, you're in a way you're burning it, because you may not actually win the state, but you might be able to diminish somebody in that state, force them to spend more money in a safe state. Now they're undercapitalized for a battleground state. So that's a really smart way of spending money. Can you compare that to one example of what Clinton did in 2016, which was like a stupid use of money?
Yeah, they went all in on Arizona.
By the way, okay, I was just gonna say, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but before you and I met, where I was in LA. My office was actually shared with the Clinton fundraising apparatus for California, and I think it also covered Nevada and Arizona. And I had drinks with some of the staff, and I got to meet the woman who was running her finance program there out of LA. But I never, asked, "Hey, how are you spending your money?" So it's really interesting now to kind of get your side of it. So Arizona, thanks for letting me interrupt there.
And the idea was that we're going to tie Trump down in Arizona, because they've nominated fucking crazy Republicans for two cycles. They've kind of turned the state purple, and the state was frankly turning purple, long thing. But that they weren't spending money in states that they had to win, like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and were spending tens of millions of dollars of a state they didn't need to win, it was kind of like, I don't know, football having, I don't know, Marshawn Lynch in your backfield. You need to gain a yard. You need to gain a yard in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and instead you decide to throw a flea flicker by going to
Right,
Arizona.
right, right,
It's
right,
fucking absurd.
right, right.
It's people that wanted to be seen as clever and smart.
Too smart by half.
Yeah, and again, most of the stuff. I mean, in politics, it's better to have the well executed mediocre plan than the poorly executed brilliant plan. Um,
I think that's so true of everything. I
yeah,
think that's true of our startup. I think that's true of all startups that I talk to and business in general is that the greatest, smartest, brilliant, yeah, you're a genius plan, but you execute it horribly. That's way worse than just having, okay, yeah, this is kind of what everybody does, but we're going to do
yeah,
it better than everybody else does it. We're
right,
not reinventing it. We're not smarter. We're just going to
right,
outperform it.
right.
This actually reminds me our very first. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember our very first conversation when you and I met. We started talking about Hillary, and it was just the inability to see the reality, which is, and I think that the campaign probably felt like they could rely on the Obama coalition, the blue wall through kind of the Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and it kind of goes back to a core tenet of life: take nothing for granted. Um, so
There's a very interesting
yeah,
book. I'm being all kind of reading material. I'm giving my reading list today. A very interesting book that I think was published in 2017 or maybe early 2018 called Shattered. And it's about the Hillary
mm,
Clinton campaign. And basically, they didn't hire, basically, two reporters got inside access to the campaign. And for obviously what the Clinton people thought was going to be kind of a hagiography and aren't we smart? I mean, it was like a victory tour, and instead they got like these seats on the Titanic, and the book is fascinating. It's very well written. It's not long, um, but the book is like the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Telltale Heart, where the narrator is crazy, and as the story goes on, you realize how crazy they are. And the one person making sense all the time that pops up like every 40 pages is Bill Clinton, who comes into the meeting and says, "I don't know if that's a good idea. Shut up, Bill. Get out." And they push him out of the room, and he shows up 40 pages later and says, "I don't know if I believe that." No, shut up, Bill. It's really kind of funny, but yeah, but again, it's like
I
because
mean that
they were super clever. I mean, one of the great
right.
stories untold in that election is that neither the Clinton campaign nor the Trump campaign did any polling from the end of the Republican convention until early October.
Wow,
And they were
wow.
doing basically data
That's
analytics, and they had phone banks. And if you were a Republican, you were seeing, one of the first things to do when you do a poll in the state of Wisconsin, for instance, and you're testing for the U.S. Senate race, you also test for the presidential race. And everybody went, huh, boy, Trump's a lot closer than I thought. And you go to Michigan, you go, I think there was a governor's race there, and you kind of go, huh, boy, Trump's a lot closer than I thought. And you see, and it was all there until finally they pulled the panic button. But basically, with all their financial advantages, they squandered a month of time they couldn't get back. Not to mention there
that's
were other there were other issues with that, and that's kind of also I don't know if it's well in that book, but there have been a couple studies about how the Hillary spots, which were, if you remember them, they were these kind of Hummel like looking kids, looking at TV sets while Trump was ranting about something. And the actual upshot of those is that they made undecided voters more likely to vote for Trump. And if you, and by the way,
Wow.
if you think, and because here's again, I'm going in the deep weeds today. There was a political theoretician from the 1920s called V.O. Key, and V.O. Key said elections are pretty simple in their analysis. What do voters want? And what they wanted were policies. What they wanted was a change. They thought the country's on the wrong track. And Hillary spent her financial advantage telling people that Trump was an asshole and a bad guy. And everybody knew Trump was an asshole and a bad guy. He'd been an asshole and a bad guy for 40 years in public life.
And what's interesting about that, by the way, they wanted a change. They wanted to shake things up. And he actually, being such an asshole, being very unpolished, being very non-political or seeming non-political, right? He was the exact thing they were looking for that
Exactly.
answered that question. This is what I want.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. We used to call that the why the fuck not vote. If I hate all these people and I don't like any of these people, who's the one person that's different from all these? And it was him. I mean, the Republican
Exactly.
primary, they were
Exactly.
a bunch of, basically they were political establishment people. He was the outsider in the general election. Yeah, I
Chris,
mean,
you know when I knew he could win, when
mm,
he was on the primary Republican primary stage and he said all of these people are also corrupt. It
mhm,
wasn't like before where they only attacked Democrats as being
yeah,
part of the swamp. He said no, these are all the swamp. This is the swamp as well within the own. If you think of like that party is hosting that thing and you're trying to be the leader of it and you're
yeah,
basically throwing your own side under the bus.
right,
He seemed to be saying what everyone thought. It was really
exactly.
interesting. That was the moment I was like, oh shit, this guy could win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was the emperor has no clothes moment. And
Mm.
but again, and so but Hillary's fall campaign against him was like, oh dear vapors, he's a terrible person. Of course, right?
Right,
I mean,
right, right. We've been watching him long enough to know that. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
right. I
It's
mean,
really interesting. I mean, this is all. Yeah. I was just gonna say it's interesting. Within the game as we are playing, we have contests running right now, and they're about to have a scoring event this week. And one of the things we're looking at is what are the polls, what are the and then when we come to the quarterly fundraising reports for the FEC, we'll start to assign points for that as well, because all of these things matter, but I don't know that any of them matter independently. Having the most money does not matter independent of having the best messaging that's resonating with the voters and it's showing in the polls, right? So,
having the it used to be that having the most money matters, and you can still produce a stat that says campaigns that spend the most money win 95% of the time. What you need to do is you need to take out safe seats and ensconced incumbents because they're going to win 70-30 and the opponent's going to raise $15,000, and so they don't count. But when you look at competitive seats, there's a different metric, and the metric isn't having the most money, it's having enough money. So in
mm,
South Carolina, in 2020, um, the Democrat raised $115 million against Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham killed the guy by 15 points or 10 points. I mean, it wasn't close. It was one of those, the polls closed, they called it. Because Lindsey Graham raised $72 million. And so it was enough money.
but I do remember I remember Lindsey Graham seeming a little nervous for a period there where he was literally on Fox News almost begging, right? I mean, there was a
Yeah.
moment where it was in doubt, right? So there was an inflection point where it became clear that he would be safe. And I wonder if that was because of money or because of support or because of messaging.
It
But I
was
do remember at us. Yeah.
no. I mean, the Lindsay people, their campaign people, Scott Howell and Associates, buddies of mine, friends of mine, professional acquaintances. They ran a really brilliant campaign, and part of it was, if you were from a southern state, from a South Carolina, being culturally from that state matters a great deal. The Democrat who's now the chair of the DNC, he was a DC lobbyist. He was a fucking lobbyist that was originally from South Carolina or went to school in South Carolina, but it wasn't like he was a real South Carolinian. He lived in the District of Columbia, and that's kind of the vibe he gave off. I mean, there was also a famous one, I think, in North Carolina. There was a governor's race where the Democrat who lost did a digital spot, and the spot was right before Labor Day, and it's him in front of a Weber kettle grill that's not on, and he's got like a couple hamburgers on there and the hot dogs, and he says it's Labor Day, and if there's anything we know in North Carolina, it's barbecue, and blah 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 blah. If you're from North Carolina, you lost your friggin' mind, because you don't refer to that as barbecue. That's a grill. Barbecue is like a religious thing in North Carolina, barbecue, which I think North Carolina pulled pork is the best. But like, to get something culturally wrong like that, to call grilling barbecuing, and to have this kind of lame ass, kind of fake, we just bought it at the hardware store and here we go thing for a digital spot. And that really collapsed the guy, because it said that he didn't understand the state. And it doesn't matter if he could have the 15-point tax plan, or or understood, kind of how to reform the, state pension funds. It didn't fucking matter. It's like something that was fundamental that everybody in North Carolina knows, he didn't know.
There's something to be said for, not even something to be said. I think it almost always comes down to, do you appear to be genuinely relatable to my culture?
Right.
And it has
Right.
to be genuinely. You can't fake it. Well, it has to appear genuine. You have to either be really good at faking it. You have to be a world-class actor, or you have to genuinely embody it. And that is, that's dependent, right?
Yeah. I mean, Arlen Specter, one of my clients, was a 5-term U.S. Senator in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania was famously described by James Carville as Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Alabama in between. But Specter knew every county, he knew every county's name, and like any place you went in a county, he knew somebody there, and he knew what they did there. If he went to McKean County, he knew what it was. If he went to Wilkes-Barre, he knew where the good diner was. I mean, and that kind of, and Arlen Specter was Jewish from Philadelphia and originally from Kansas. By the way, Bob Dole and Arlen Specter were born in the same town, both Russell, Kansas, which is kind of amazing.
Wow. I had no
But
idea.
again, culturally, and Specter was a lawyer and a DA, and and culturally, he was probably not like the people in Tioga County, but he understood them, and he related to them and listened to them, and people kind of get that.
It's,
I mean,
you don't have to be the same culturally, but you have to be culturally relatable, right?
yes,
Like
yes,
there's a slight nuance there. You don't have to be the same as me, but I have to be able to relate to it. We have to be able to relate to each other, our cultures. Which, by the way, is something I thought Vivek Ramaswamy did very well, relating to Christian values through his own Hindu values, and how he bridged that gap. Very culturally different, but he was actually able to connect with people in Iowa that
Hmm.
are evangelicals in this. And if you watched how they spoke about it, they really respected that. There was a relatability between the two.
Hmm.
So there's a slight nuance there. It doesn't have to be the same, but it has to be relatable.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And you can be different. I mean, famously the liberal blue collar hero was Franklin fucking Roosevelt, who drank martinis in the middle of the day, and he smoked with a cigarette holder. And there's the famous apocryphal picture of him with the cigarette holder, like smiling, and and he's the blue collar hero, because he was certainly relatable.
Yeah, and generations of wealth in his family, including his what was his great
Yeah, right.
uncle
I
or
mean, yeah,
uncle Ted Roosevelt. So yeah, I mean, how do you relate to a minor?
he was
If
a
you come from
plutocrat.
that, but it's a skill.
He was a
Yeah,
plutocrat. Yeah, and again, and part of it is, to go to Biden 22. He was outspent in the primaries. He kind of was getting crushed. There were two pieces of video that people saw that had this incredible impact. One of them was he was going to the New York Times editorial board, and where he got killed, and he didn't get the endorsement, but he was going up with an elevator operator, and she was middle aged, African American woman, and they're going up, and she kind of turns around and she says, "You're my favorite, by the way." And he smiles and he says, "Let's do a selfie." And they just have this little moment in the elevator, that's you kind of like, I want to vote for that guy. He's normal. And then there was something in one of the early primaries, might have been South Carolina, where there's a little kid in this big crowd, and the father drags the kid up, and he said, "This is Timmy, and Timmy's got a stutter, and I know you had a stutter." And Biden just like leans into the kid, and he just has this 45-second minute thing with the kid, and and it made Biden relatable and lovable, and you're like, that's the guy. This kind of avuncular, paternal figure, I vote for. And that kind of stuff is, and Biden's been in fucking DC for 50, half a century, and it's, but those moments you kind of go like, okay, that's the guy I want to vote for.
yeah, well said. Um, I'm really glad we went down that conversation. There are a couple. There's so much news right now, Chris, that we have to jump into.
Yeah.
Obviously, Nevada primaries last night. The big winner was none of these candidates, with like 60
Yeah.
something percent of the vote I saw.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also, so if you didn't, in last week's episode, I said that I think one of the interesting things will be, what will the turnout be in the primaries, because that's also a
Mhm.
referendum on Haley, because she was really the
Right.
only choice in the primaries that
Right.
anybody would vote for. And the turnout was about 40% of what it normally what it was in the previous cycle.
Mhm.
It was a little. It was around 80,000. Previously, it was like 180 something. So very low turnout. She didn't even win. I think she ended up with 30 something percent of the vote, with like
Right.
21,000 votes. You said it earlier, the death nail. That we're already hearing the death rattle. It's it. I think we talked before. I think she still goes through South Carolina potentially, but I think it
Mhm.
makes it. We have an over under question coming up at the end of this in a few
Okay.
minutes for Trump tomorrow in the caucuses. But there is an argument to where, if the turnout there is twice as high as it normally is, and he wins that with what I would assume will be around 90 something percent, it does make it a little. Does she lose all funding? She's already laid down her media spend, but to your point, maybe she just suspends before South Carolina. She doesn't drop out. Curious what you think.
I think she'll play through South Carolina. Um, just to, because it's her home state, and and if she gets killed in South Carolina and then Trump loses the election, she gets to what they call she gets to wave the bloody flag after, and basically go back to her home state and said, "You're all a bunch of idiots, and if you had supported me, we wouldn't have lost everything." I mean,
Is there
so
is there
yeah,
Yeah, is there any argument to be made for? I mean, her even within the state though, they're turning against her. Nancy Mace is
yeah,
against, Tim Scott. Like she's losing within the state the support that you. So in a way, it's interesting what we were just talking about. I could imagine being in South Carolina and seeing her as the carpetbagger from DC and seeing Trump as the native son of South Carolina in the way people are relating to him, the way that he's touching their cultural values in
yeah.
a way, where she's coming in, she's spending all this money that's coming from the Koch network. She's seen as getting outside money, and also the some of the Democrat money that was coming into her campaign, or some of the big Democrat donors.
Mhm.
Is there anything to be said for if she really wants to set herself up for 28, presuming even if Trump were to win, he couldn't run again? Listen, you get down on you bend the knee, you get back in his good graces, you set yourself up, you say, is there any benefit to doing that?
No, no, none. Because there's a million politicians out there who have filleted Trump, and he's turned on them. And so, if he was if it was a normal scenario, you could say maybe. But I think what her advantage would be is for her to say, "I was right, you were all wrong," and shut up. You're going to take us down to defeat again. And I think that's a fairly compelling argument. In 1972, George McGovern became the Democratic nominee, and his slogan in the primary was right from the start. What was the start? The start of the Vietnam War. He was anti-Vietnam, and so in 28, Haley, if things go as I think they're going to go, and Trump loses the general election, um, you know, Haley 28, I told you so. Um, but
Okay,
by the way,
very interesting. I then yeah.
yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court's going to have a lot to say in the next couple of days, about the Trump case.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah. The Court of Appeals already had something interesting to say as well yesterday.
yeah, they said fuck you. And
Yeah.
once again, that crack Trump legal team managed to push an important trial at, when the fall campaign is going to start. So that's all anybody's going to talk about. And you kind of go like, uh, it's crazy. I mean, just absolutely crazy, incompetent, legal incompetence. But
Yeah.
by the way, I don't think, and we could do this as an over under, but I don't think the Supreme Court is going to hear it. I think they're just going to go like, not our problem. And to all the conspiracy theorists out there, this particular Supreme Court on matters of Trump elections and Trump post presidency, they've all been, unanimous cases. And, maybe this isn't unanimous, but I think it's kind of, but by the way, they are kind of going to rule on the 14th Amendment, that which I think they're going to rule, and I think most people think that they're going to rule that the 14th Amendment does not preclude Trump from running again. Um, you know,
Yeah, it's interesting. The smart money right now is that they're going to play politics and not take an appeal on the circuit court's ruling about immunity and
yeah,
deal a blow to Trump that way, but then also give him by dismissing the 14th Amendment, they're going to rule against Colorado. Um,
and
Interestingly
honestly,
enough,
I think both of those are
yeah,
proper decisions. I mean, I would
yeah.
I
Well,
would rule.
I'm glad you. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because really what I've realized, or what comes to mind about the 14th Amendment, is that the 14th Amendment is so incredibly fucking unclear that how could
Yeah,
you apply it, right? Because it says engaged in insurrection. So right then, how do you determine that? Because it doesn't go on to say found guilty of it. It doesn't say that there's any process by which determining that. So I
Right.
don't think the argument that that the president is not an officer of the government. I don't think that that argument makes any sense. He's sworn into an office. He is literally an officer
Mhm.
of the government. He's but the idea of what is an insurrection and who determines that when and how is completely left undone in that. And for I understand the reasoning why. It was kind of clear if you were a southerner who
Right.
rebelled, that was you were part of, you were guilty. But there was no contemplation about how that would be used in the future and what would the process be. What is most interesting to me, by the way, is now the yesterday Gates and Elise Stefanik introduced the resolution that the House will vote on Trump did not commit, and they're actively saying he didn't do it, and I think that's forcing the hand right there.
It's it's so stupid it can only happen in politics. Um, and I think the biggest problem with the 14th Amendment case is that Trump isn't found guilty of it. There's no, I mean, it's alleging a crime, and I mean, it's like Minority Report. I can see into the future. No, I mean, so I think on that alone, and I think most people think that it's stupid, and most legal scholars think it's stupid, and that the people that tried this are kind of like low-level nitwits. Uh, yeah, but Trump doesn't win. I mean, there's this really interesting kind of push-pull in this thing, is that Trump loses handily if he makes the election either about January 6th, or more importantly, the past, because nobody gives a fuck. I mean, ultimately it becomes this. I mean, ultimately, if 65% of the people say the country is in the wrong direction, litigating that out does not go back to, I said, VOK. What's in it for me? There's nothing in it for them. I mean, you want to go kind of stretch and extrapolate that out and say, oh, it's saving democracy, or it's thwarting deep state, or whatever the fuck you want to do. No, it's none of that above. I mean, Trump, relitigating the past is what they want to do, and because it is a past thing, regardless of what your view is on it, it is a past event and is irrelevant to how I'm going to vote for the future, because that's what elections are always about, the future.
So
Yeah,
I'm so glad you said that, because the last thing I think we can talk about before we wrap it up is the kind of clusterfuck that is the Mayorkas impeachment and the dead border deal that uh,
yeah.
I think may be the biggest political gift to Biden if done well, if executed well. I don't think that Biden also. I think his argument about saving democracy would have been a poor general election argument, because it is also past looking in a way. It's saying that
Mhm.
Trump is and it's kind of relitigating who Trump is. He's a threat.
Right.
But now saying he's a threat because I'm trying to do things and he's specifically stepping in and hurting the country to help himself, that is about the future, right? So the way he frames that, and I think the smart way to say, listen, we've struggled to protect the border. We can do more, we want to do more, and this was a negotiation to do just that. I think that sways people in that argument when people can see very clearly, like James Langford is a GOP senator from Oklahoma. He isn't he isn't a liberal, libtard like people might want to say. He got substantive things, and now they're sabotaging their own. They got everything they wanted. So I think that that was a real political gift. I don't know about you. I don't know if you think that's going to resonate with people, but I think for a certain segment of far right, it doesn't matter. But I think for the center
Right.
right, I think it matters.
Yeah, there are a couple things, and again, the yesterday I was having a conversation with a person who is um, A-list Democratic communication director, and we both talked about how bad the comms has been on all of this. I mean, basically Republicans Governor Abbott in Texas and the Republicans bent Biden over on this deal. They got literally every fucking thing they wanted or could have wanted. The play is you declare victory, you take the win, then you continue to attack him on that and say, we had to force his hand because he's so weak and out of touch. And he said for, 3.5 years there wasn't an issue, and now there's an issue, and this is what we've been screaming about because you are so weak and out of touch. That's the play. I mean, and that's the obvious play. I mean, basically what Biden did and Democrats did on the border deal was said to Republicans, you are right. This isn't even hard. Now, I will say, coming out of, the communications coming out of the border deal, it was explained so poorly. And there was the old about 5,000 border contact. And it's like, and you first read it. And again, I read the original release that the bipartisan committee released, the statement on it. I couldn't make head or tail of it. And frankly, I read it that it's 5,000 border crossings a day. And that's not what it was. But it's more, but that's the comms job. That's the job of the comms to say, no, we're like, what are we trying to get out of this? Let's explain it clearly. And so that was an incredible failure. And every time I think the Biden campaign is going to get it together, and again, it's Twitter, not everybody sees it, but it kind of goes to the entire messaging. They had a picture of him at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office signing something with his sunglasses on. And basically it was like, how cool is Biden? And everybody normal looks at it and go, oh my God, it's Weekend at Bernie's.
You don't try to make something cool that isn't cool. I mean, maybe he's cool for an 80-year-old, but that's not cool for the majority of the people, right? Like, oh yeah, he's a cool 80-year-old, cool, whatever. But that's interesting.
A cool politician is like the best friend parent. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants your parent to be your best friend, for Christ's sake. They want you to be the parent.
Right.
They don't. No 15-year-old wants cool dad hanging with his friends, right?
Right. Yeah, maybe Obama was the closest that anybody came to kind of breaking that mold. Clinton before him a little bit, but even then, it's like, yeah they're cool for a politician.
Cool. Yeah, cool. I mean,
All right,
and I will say, yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I think Obama was definitely the coolest president we've had. Maybe in my lifetime, but he got crushed in the by-elections and lost the House and the Senate, and set the stage for Donald Trump. So don't be cool, be good.
Yeah, right? Exactly. All right, so like you said, we're going to do over under, and obviously before our next episode, we will have both the Nevada caucus and the Super Bowl. So there's a lot to unpack there. All right, I'm going to throw this out, and then feel free to throw back at me anything you might have. Nevada caucus, Trump gets over the break now is 96.8%. What do you think? Over, under?
Under. I'll go under.
Sorry. What did you have for the over under on 96.8?
I'll go under.
Okay, interesting. All right.
And the only reason I go under is because I think that in caucuses like that, you're going to get 5 people to vote for DeSantis and 3 people for Vivek. And I mean, you're going to get that kind of thing. And I think that I think the number is going to be high 80s, but I don't think it's be like 96.
That's a good point. So Biden crushed with like 97%, 96% in South Carolina, but that was a primary. A caucus is going to be a slightly different scenario. I don't think you can get as high in the caucus. Good point. Right. What about the total turnout? Generally, it's around 120,000, but under. Because of the 40% of under. Okay, so you just think people aren't going to be motivated to turn out? They know he's a done deal.
Right. I mean, it's
Okay. What is the for full disclosure by the way, I'm a San Francisco 49ers fan. So this is going to be a little gratuitous on my part. I have the Super Bowl winner being San Francisco plus 3.5 points. You going to take over, under?
Boy, I like that.
That's a good one, right?
That's a really
I'm
good
getting
bet.
better at setting the line. Yeah.
Yeah, I would take the over, but I would stay a mile clear from
Mm,
that bet. I would not go near that bet.
very cool.
So I have one for you.
What?
Let me
Yes.
give you one. Supreme Court decides to hear the Trump case, expedites it out, and says we're going to hear this
Mm.
now. Over under
The immunity one. I'm
immunity
going to
case.
say under 50%, under 50% likelihood, because as we talked about, I think they're going to try to come up with a political solution, which is to give and take a little bit. Because I do think they're going to rule in Trump's favor on the Colorado case.
Okay,
Ah,
over under. I
oh,
got it. Follow up.
yep,
O-
yep.
Over under. Over under. Is it unanimous or not?
On not taking the case,
Yeah, the immunity case.
I think it's under 50%. I think there will be at least one justice that wants to take
Okay.
that case.
Okay.
And I have in my mind who I think it would be, but I don't know. Yeah, I think it is the staunch the Italian guy who came in. God, I can't think of his name now. You know, what I'm talking
Alito.
about the one who always is
Alito.
Alito, Samuel Alito. Yeah, exactly. I think he's somebody who would be interested in taking that case.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Clarence Thomas both. Oh, but I thought you were going to go a different way with the Supreme Court. Over under, and this might be a little early because we're not going to get the ruling before the next one, but 5-4. So plus 5 is the over under on the
Okay.
ruling on Colorado.
So over is less than 5.
Over would be if all six conservatives vote to dismiss the Colorado.
Over and I'll ask you. I think it's going to be unanimous.
That's an interesting question because in my mind I was thinking there could also be some liberals on the court that would go against that.
The new.
Based
I
on
mean,
what we talked about
if there is
before,
one,
I agree. I think it could be a
yeah.
unanimous ruling.
If there is one, I think maybe Kendi Jackson, the new one. But I think it's going to be unanimous. You know, because again,
Interesting.
it's an unnecessary thing for them to. I mean, it's an angel's
Right.
dancing ahead of the
That's
ping thing, and it's like
okay. I
All
think
right,
we
man.
can. I think we can leave it there. I was going to ask you over under 50% Taylor Swift endorses Biden at the Super Bowl, but I think that's more of a joke possibility anyway.
Crazy stuff.
All right, Chris. Enjoy
All right,
the
man.
Super Bowl. Enjoy the
I will.
Nevada caucuses. I will see you in a week from Vegas for the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association conference.
Sounds exciting. I want to hear updates. Thanks, man.